In this video, I'm going to talk about and demonstrate knitting technique. And I don't mean English versus continental, but I more mean how you are using the needles to manipulate and make your stitches. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm happy to have you here. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. So knitting technique is, in my mind, how you use the needles to manipulate your stitches. Do you gauge swatch with a needle size and you don't meet gauge and you switch to smaller needles, but your gauge stays the same and doesn't get smaller like it should? If you have trouble like this, meeting gauge by changing needle size, and your gauge kind of behaves erratically, it could be due to your needle technique. Let me show you what I mean by this. These things that I'm talking about will hold true whether you hold your yarn in your right hand or your left hand. It is more what the needles are doing in relation to each other, and how you're using the needles to manipulate and make your stitches. So our needles are certain millimeter sizes. There is a tip where the tip is pointier and it graduates to the shaft. The shaft is a consistent millimeter diameter, or should be in well-made needles, across the shaft of the needle tip. The tip of the needle is smaller millimeters as it gets pointier. And so these are lace tipped needles, so they get quite pointy, and the increase to the shaft is a long-ish stretch on the needle. When we use our needles to make a stitch, therefore, we need to size our stitches onto the shaft of the right hand needle, because that is our measuring tool. That's our measuring cup. You wouldn't take a recipe that says 1 cup of flour and use a rounded 1 cup of flour and expect your recipe to turn out correctly. You've used too much flour. The same holds true with our knitting needles. I'm going to make a couple of stitches to start and then talk about what's happening here. So when we make a new stitch, ideally the old stitches on the left-hand needle are moved forward and on the point of the needle so that we have space to insert our right-hand needle tip into that stitch without stretching this stitch out and making it larger than it was, because it's already been sized. So we want to manipulate it as little as possible. So there's room now for my right-hand needle tip to enter the stitch. Again, we want to manipulate this old stitch as little as possible. So just the tip of the right-hand needle should enter and you make your loop. The needle tips, so notice how my needle tips are perpendicular to each other. And my tips are always touching. The needle material is always touching. Now I've pulled that loop. I need to size that loop. So I need to then, now the whole needle shaft goes into that new stitch. And then when I exit, when I drop this old stitch, we want to just slide it straight off. This sizes this stitch to the shaft of the right-hand needle tip while manipulating the old stitch that we're using to build our new stitch out of as little as possible. So the old stitches are sliding to the needle tip, I use just the tip, and then I insert the full shaft into that new stitch, and I drop the old one straight off in the direction of this needle tip. And my needles are always touching. I'm doing it very slowly, but this would be sped up. This would be what is happening when I am knitting. And so, like I said, it doesn't matter which hand you hold your yarn in. If you are continental, same thing, the tip and then the shaft onto that new stitch and then drop off. So analyze how, really pay attention to how you are using your needles. Say you don't have them perpendicular, you have them more at an obtuse angle, and you aren't bringing them to the old ones to the tip, and you're inserting the full needle in and the needles aren't touching. Well, look, this old stitch is being stretched out of shape. If I am just doing this, this stitch has not been sized. It's much larger than the shaft of the needle. And on top of that, I've stretched the old stitch and I haven't sized the new stitch. And so everything is looser, and it's not going to matter what millimeter size needle I'm using. I'm arbitrarily making gauge because I'm not using my needle tip as the measuring tool it was designed to be. I'm just using it as a tool to manipulate the stitches. I'm not using it as its full measuring cup. So that could potentially be a reason why when you change needle sizes, it doesn't change your gauge very much, because you're not actually using your needle as the measuring tool it is. Instead, if the stitches come to the tip, you're holding things perpendicular, you're letting that stitch get sized on the shaft, and then the stitch comes off in the direction it was traveling, then you are using your needles as the measuring tool it was designed to be. I hope this was a helpful demonstration. It's really important to look at how you are using your needles and analyze what you're doing with your hands to see if there's ways in which you can improve. If you're having problems with your tension or you're having problems with your gauge, really look at what you're doing with the yarn, how you're tensioning it, how you're holding the needles, and how you're using the needles to size and make your stitches. Did you find this demonstration helpful? Do you think it could improve your knitting? Let me know in the comments below. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.